Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Paloma, and today's video is going to be my favorite books of all time. So let's get started. So even though I said these are my favorite books of all time, there are actually a bit more books that I would add to this list, but for the sake of this video, these are going to be the books that I always come back to, or I've at least read more than once. A popular bestseller since its publication in 1844, The Count of Monte Cristo is one of the great page-turning thrillers of all time. Set against the tumultuous years of the post-Napoleonic era, Dumas's grand historical romance recounts the swashbuckling adventures of Edmond Dantes, a dashing young sailor falsely accused of treason. The story of his long imprisonment, dramatic escape, and carefully wrought revenge offers up a vision of France that has become immortal. I love this book. My dad actually made me watch the movie. I think it was from 2002, and the movie was so good. I personally recommend it. After reading the book though, I kind of see where they left some things out of it just to make it the action movie that it is. I do think it still holds up in terms of, in comparison to the book. And I haven't yet watched the actual new French one that came out. So I have to check that out and see if it compares to the book. But what I love the most about this book is the journey Edmond Dantes goes through, from his imprisonment to freedom and to all his revenge that he goes through. But even though it's technically revenge on the people who put him in the prison, he still has a kind heart, and he really, when people really need his help, he's there for them. So it's not just a story of, I'm so angry, I want to exact revenge. It's also really a commentary on the human condition, on the multitudes of feelings that we have, even if we've been wronged, that we can still show kindness to the people around us instead of just being, really brutal and really mean about it. So between 1844 and 1846, The Count of Monte Cristo was actually published in the Journal of Debates, which was a French publication, and you can see that when you read it. In some chapters, he's like, readers, if you remember last time, Edmond Dantes was blah, 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 blah. And once you realize that it was actually published in a magazine, I think it makes for a better reading experience. I know it's supposed to be meant to be serious, but it adds like a little fun to it, because it's like, oh yeah, well, I do remember reading it. I was just there in the last chapter. And you have to think about when it was published at the time, if you really love the story, having to wait for the publication to come out just to see what happens to the characters. And I think it's really cool. I'm glad that they've truncated it into a novel, but I really would kind of like to see the magazine that it was actually published in and how it actually looked versus in this book. So when I first picked up this book, as I was starting to get into classical literature, I did think the page count and the book itself was a little daunting. But once you really start to read it, honestly, the pages start to fly by, because the prose in this book is actually really well done. The back of the book calls it a romance. There is romance in there. It's actually one of the central plots to the story, but I do think it's more about Edmond Dantes' humanity, because he's such a complex character, not only because he was falsely accused of treason, but how he shows kindness even despite that, despite being put in this prison. When he finally gets out and he has the opportunity to exact revenge as quickly as he could, he actually formulates a slow, calculating plan that is arguably really well done. I couldn't even think of a way to do that. And even alongside that, there's other people in the story that need his help, and he's willing to put his revenge aside to help them out, even if it's just for a brief moment. And I think that really speaks to just how kindness can really prevail over hatred, because even though deep down inside he actually hated the people who put him in prison, he still kind of felt bad for them. Especially he felt bad for his romantic interest, Mercedes. And I don't want to give too much away, but their reunion, it almost brought a tear to my eye. I thought it was so beautifully well done. There's not much else I could say about this book. I think it's worth it. I think everybody should read it at least once in their life, or at least watch the movies. If I had to pick a movie, it would have to be the 2000s movie because I haven't seen the new French one. Hopefully the French one lives up to this, because this is actually really hard to live up to. And it's the same thing with The Three Musketeers that he also wrote, and the movie as well with Jeremy Irons, and The Man in the Iron Mask. I think The Man in the Iron Mask movie was really well done. It was my first introduction to Leonardo DiCaprio, and I think he really hit it out the park. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Vanishing Half by Bennett. If you've seen my previous video on books to read during Black History Month, I did mention this book as one of them. I personally devoured this book. There's not enough words in the English language to kind of describe how great it is. I would consider it a classic of the modern era just based on the prose. It reminded me of Passing, and I can't remember the name of the author at this moment, but there was a movie with Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga. I think The Vanishing Half was a really great exploration on the idea of passing, what it means physically and psychologically. It's unlike any book I've typically read. I mean, if you go through my library, this would probably stand out the most just based on the plot itself, and I think it's really well done. I think Bennett is a really great writer, and it's a book I will always recommend to somebody. The next book on my list is going to be Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I read this around the same time as I read Homegoing by Gyasi, because I really love historical fiction, and both books were at a period of time that I wasn't really familiar with. Homegoing, which was part of the slave trade all the way up to modern times, whereas Pachinko is set in the Japanese occupation of Korea during the 1900s, all the way up to, I don't want to say modern. Yeah, we're literally going from the 1900s all the way up to the 80s, which I think is a really good stopping point considering the book itself. There was a few issues I had with the book. It mostly was the antagonist of the story. If I hate the antagonist, that means it's a really good book, and the antagonist is doing his job very well, because I hated the antagonist so much. My friend will tell you how much I hate him. I personally almost didn't even want to watch the Apple TV Plus series because I hate him so much. Sunja deserves so much more than she got in this book, but it's a really compelling book. I think Min Jin Lee did a really great job. Her prose and detail is so well done, and it almost makes you feel like you're actually there with Sunja and her family as she's going through this really tough time. And it's so beautiful. It's so well done. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is actually my first Colson Whitehead book. I know he had created like the Underground Railroad. I can't wait to watch the movie. I think I've said this in a previous video as well. I did recommend this in my Black History Month book. I wish I could send an email to Colson Whitehead and tell him how much this book meant to me and how much I really enjoyed it. For every book that I talk about, I always say I can't really describe it. There's like such an internal feeling that I felt that really can't be described as I read every single page of this. It was so heartbreaking, it was so harrowing, and the ending almost like it really blew my mind. And I want to pick Colson Whitehead's mind apart because I want to be a writer, and I think his writing is so inspirational, and I just want to know his thoughts on, the characters he comes up with, the setting he comes up with, and how he really pulls it all together to pull off such a really great book. As much as I'm really giddy about it, it's actually a really sad book, and it's so well done. What I loved the most about The Nickel Boys was the main character, Elwood. I don't want to say I enjoyed his journey, but the journey of naivety into almost maturing because you're in such a harrowing place, I don't want to say it's interesting because then it almost sounds perversive, but it makes you think. While I was reading How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, and I will do a review on it, there's a section where he goes to a prison, and you have the opportunity. It's a defunct prison, there's an opportunity for you to sit in one of the non-working electric chairs. And he's describing sitting in this electric chair. There's no moment in this book that kind of requires an electric chair, but it's almost similar in the way that what he's going through at this reformatory school is kind of similar to that feeling of sitting in that electric chair where it's not turned on, but you can almost feel the electricity pulsing under it. It's not working, but you can really almost imagine it happening to you. And so he's scared the entire time that he's at this school, and you can almost feel it under your own skin how scared he is, especially when he's confronted with, the other boys and the other bullies in the school. There really isn't enough words in the English language to describe it, and it's such a short book too. And Colson Whitehead was able to put so much love and horror and friendship and grief into just like such a small book, and it's really inspiring. So the next book I'm going to talk about, which I actually don't have my copy here, I did give it away to a friend, is going to be War and Peace by Tolstoy. Much like the Count of Monte Cristo, War and Peace was published in a magazine, the Russian Messenger or the Russian Herald, in 1865 to 1869. It did have a few edits before it was turned into a novel, and I'm kind of curious what the first edition looks like in that magazine. If there's a bunch of character changes within like Pierre or like Kutuzov, or even, I almost forgot the names, Andrei Bolkonsky, Princess Maria. I mean, what were they like in that first edition? I think if you want to start War and Peace, I would start off with either of the movies or the television series before you jump into the book. It's a really big book, and it can seem really daunting and scary to read that many pages. I personally think it was worth it. There were a few times where Tolstoy inputs his own opinion on certain things, and that kind of distracts away from the story at hand. But once you really put that aside, it's still a really great story. Pierre was very annoying, but you almost kind of feel bad for him, and you want to give him a hug, and you just want to be like, Pierre, I need you to sit down and stay over there. And he's like, no, I won't stay over there. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to create a problem for everybody involved. And he's a really great character because he's so flawed and he's so multi-layered. Even if he's just like, he thinks he's intellectually smart, but he's also a little bit kind of dumb socially. I think it's really great. And all the other characters in the book, I could write an essay on a lot of topics that were within the book. I think it's a really great book. It's a classic for a reason. So that's all my favorite books. If you'd like a more in-depth review of any of the books mentioned, please let me know and I'd be happy to make that video. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!